Welcome to Creating Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Paige. This is an inspirational podcast where guests come on and share their real life stories. They discuss their struggles, hardships, and traumas. They also discuss how those encounters have helped them change, grow, and the healing process they've experienced. They share where they are today in hopes of helping someone else who could be going through the same or similar situations. So join me as we inspire others weekly to become the best versions of themselves. Hey y'all, welcome into another episode of Creating Yourself podcast with me, your host Paige. Today I am super excited to have back Maya from our Survivor's Guilt episode, and she's going to talk to us today about her full story, about her brother, and her own podcast called the Surviving Siblings podcast, and her journey with that. Hey Maya, how are you?
Hey, I'm great, Paige. I'm super excited to be back. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah. I loved our last episode that we did together. I got a lot of really great feedback from it. I think it turned out amazing. I think it was a really great episode. So I was super excited to talk to you and have you back today.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it too. I mean, they're wonderful, Lenny and Paula. You.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great panel, and I loved the different perspectives. I love doing that. I think it's so important. I think it's so important to have all family perspectives and understand each other and understand that, we all go through pain and loss. So I thought it was great. Yeah.
Yeah, I did too. I got a lot of really positive feedback from that episode. So I'm excited to have you back and hear like more about your story and your journey and just you in general. So
Yeah. Well, where do you want me to start? There's so much to unpack. You tell me.
Right. Listen, you start wherever you're comfortable starting with. If you want to go
Sure.
all the way back to the beginning or in the middle, like it's totally up to you.
Sure. So I'll just talk about what happened and kind of paint a picture. So this all really started with losing the Surviving Siblings podcast, right? I'm an entrepreneur overall and run multiple businesses, but the Surviving Siblings podcast was really something that is like a labor of love for me and something I do to give back to the sibling loss community and those who want to know more about it. But it didn't really start out that way. So I lost my brother to a homicide in November of 2016. He was shot, he was killed by someone he knew. It was a horrific experience for my entire family, obviously. But years afterwards, that's where I decided to finally come forward and tell my story because I was already comfortable with this medium that we're on right now, right? I was comfortable with podcasting. So that was the evolution. I waited years to tell my story, to truly tell my story for legal reasons, for mental reasons, for emotional reasons. People always wonder about that too. They're like, and I had a lot of pressure on me as well, Paige, to like talk about it, but I couldn't legally. And then also, I don't think I was ready. And so sometimes when people come to me, just as a side note, some people come to me and they're like, I want to tell my story. I always tell them, I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure you're ready for it? Because it's a lot to unpack. And I was so happy that I waited till March of 2022 to release the first season of the show because it's really vulnerable. It's a lot. It's my first 5 years of grief. And I look back now and I'm so grateful that I did wait to tell such a detailed story and to tell all that because one, legally I could. That's one thing.
Right.
But two, I was in such a different place 5.5 years into the journey than I was even when I could legally first talk about it. I don't know. I think we're always healing and we're always going through that process. But for me, I was in a place where I wasn't breaking down crying, telling the whole story. A lot of people ask me, was it cathartic? It was a lot of different things. It was hard. It was easy. It was maybe cathartic a little bit, but it was almost like I had just been carrying around a bunch of luggage and it was really heavy. And I finally just set it down. So it was more like a relief for me. I don't know. I think all these other emotions too, but that was the big thing for me. And I don't know if I would have felt that had I done it, a year into it. No, 2 years into it. So I think that's a big part of it. But yeah, I lost my brother to a homicide, gun violence, someone he knew. Devastating story. My brother and I have the same birthday, 3 years apart, so we've got a lot of connection. We grew
Yeah.
up very, very close. I'm older than him, so yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in the story. So I guess you kind of just have to let me know what you want to know. Do you let me know? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my thing, I'm a huge like true crime fan.
Yeah.
And my thing for me is like, it's not about, the like the murder part of it. And I feel like a lot of people, when you tell people like, oh, I love to watch like true crime things, they're like, why do you like to watch people like die? That's not what it is for me. And I think
Mm-hmm.
people have that misconception of it. For me, it's like, why did the person that did it do it? What made them do it? For me, it's all about the why.
Mm-hmm.
You know. So I guess that's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
where you could start is do they know like why it happened? Um, since it obviously was someone that he knew, and I feel like that a lot of the times that is
Mm-hmm.
the case with homicide too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is not a question I get very often, but I do talk about it on the first season, so happy
Mm-hmm.
to talk about it. Um, so it was a really unknown thing at first. It was very
Mm-hmm.
confusing because was he did a lot of different things. You can find him on YouTube. Anyone who listens to the show has figured out who he is. His name's Andreas. It's
Mm-hmm.
not hard. He was really, really extroverted, even more so than me, which people are like, are you kidding? I'm like, I'm serious. So
Mm-hmm.
he was shooting a music video with some guys he didn't know really, really well, but he knew them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how much of the relationship, I don't know how long the relationship had been going on or anything like that, right? The
Mm-hmm.
friendship, whatever it was. I learned since then, though, in like the 1 to 3 years after his passing, um, more about these guys and some of the really horrific things they had done to other people as well.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, they were saying it was an accident, which, if you know anything about guns, you would take one look at this injury and know it was not. Because this is graphic, but he was shot in the face, right? So it was pretty obvious that it was not an accident.
Mm-hmm.
And through time, it's a lot to unpack in one episode. So again, you can listen to the full,
Right.
if you're like you,
Yeah.
Paige, you can listen to the full kind of story in season
Mm-hmm.
one. But to put it in a nutshell, they said it was an accident. But a lot of things weren't making sense to me because I was a true crime junkie too. Before it kind of happens to you, it kind
Mm-hmm.
of changes things. But I was too, so I was like, no, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. Why were they on a set with real guns? This was it didn't make,
Right.
nothing added up. And as time went on, more of the truths came out. Like, one of the guys was not, there was a bunch of fake guns on set. One of the guys had a real gun in his holster. That's the one that killed my brother. So none
Mm.
of it added up. Through time, I've been leaked information. I've been told that, I know for 100% fact that they owed my brother money for the shoot. It was only a couple
Mm-hmm.
$100s, and I've been told it was $600 from multiple people, and they didn't pay their people. And so some people have told me that was the incentive because they had finished, this
Mm-hmm.
was their final scene, and they killed him. That was a very hard thing for me to hear and deal with, and it
Yeah.
really tormented me for the first 3 years. Really tormented me. And I do talk about this in detail, but at the end of the day, I'll never 100% know why. And that was a really hard thing
Right.
because in loss, we want to know why. And everybody has different levels of needing answers, right? Some of us just need to know enough and then we're like, okay, we're good. Some of us are deep investigators like you and I, Paige, and we want to know it all and we want to
Mm-hmm.
understand it all and we got to get it
Yeah.
all. And that's what I needed. And so it took me years of digging, but I think overall the motive was, whether it was completely intentional or not, they still murdered my brother. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I do think there was some monetary incentive. I don't think they had good intentions for him. I've added it all up and put it all together and ended up working with a detective that was not on the case, which I talk about very late in the first season. who gave me answers and did confirm that it was a homicide. So at the end of the day, I don't know that the motive matters as much in this situation because so much time passed and it became a cold case. So, and they dismissed the guy because they couldn't find enough. But he was quite guilty because he gave all his guns and stuff over and never came back for them, which is another big sign in these types of cases. Yeah. So, yeah, I wish I could tell you more detail, but that's really all. It's a difficult one. Yeah. But I'm not alone. There's a lot of people out there where their sibling or loved one is killed and people walk. It's a very common story.
Yeah. Yeah. It's too common, actually.
Very common.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a family member of mine or someone that I'm related to, but I went to college with a girl who went missing and her remains were found. 13 years later, they finally charged her boyfriend just last year. And his case was supposed to go to trial this week, I believe. And they offered him a plea deal. And the maximum that he can get is 3 years on a
so that was the other part, Paige. I love that you brought this up. Yeah, I love that you brought this up. So a lot of people have criticized my story. It's not a story, it's my life, which I like to remind people of. I'm like, this is reality. This is not a story. Yeah. When I finally got the right detective on this, he was like, because of what has gone on, we're past the statute of limitations. People will always tear me up and down because of that. They'll say, there's no statute of limitations on murder. Hold on a second. This would not be tried as a murder case because they can't prove enough. So it would be tried as a manslaughter case. There is a statute of limitations with most states because this is a state-dictated thing, not a national dictated thing. So with manslaughter, there's a 2-year statute of limitations for most states, not all. Some are 3, some are 4. It depends on where you live. But in Georgia, it was a 2-year. So even though we had enough evidence at that time, this was 4 or 5 years into it now, it was past the statute of limitation. Had we gone to court, though, he would have been facing 2 to 3 years. Good behavior, you're out in how many months? Same thing.
Probably less than a year,
your friend that you knew, and this all happened.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that was shocking too on the path to find that out. Yeah.
Yeah, they said the maximum that he can get is 3 years for manslaughter. And he's never been arrested before. He's never been in trouble with the law before. Nothing. So, and the least that he can get is he can do no jail time with probation. And it's just like, it's mind blowing. Like, when I tell you I have followed this case since the day that she went missing in 2011, and it's just like, it's crazy. Like, the day that I found out he got arrested, I called my mom in tears. I was like hyperventilating, crying, and I didn't even like know her. She was more of like an associate that I went to college with, and my mom couldn't even understand what I was saying because I was like, they arrested him. She was like, arrested who? Like, what is happening? She was freaked out, and it's just mind blowing that he could walk with no jail time at all. And it's like, he was the last one to see her, last one to talk to her. He's the one who went to her house the next morning, called 911, and he called her dad before he even entered her apartment, and then he literally called 911 within 2 minutes later and was like, she's missing, she's not here. And it's like, what? Nothing makes sense. So it's like, that he did it. But I think her family is somewhat happy with the fact that he admitted with, the plea deal that he did is the reason that she is no longer here. But it's not justice in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So it's just...
Yeah, and I like that you bring up justice because this is also something I get all the time. There's a lot of siblings in like my private Facebook group that I have, like our support group, the things that we've started to offer, which again, I had no idea I'd be doing this 2 years ago when I put all of this out. But it's been a beautiful, kind of thing that's moved forward as you create a community like you're doing here, Paige. And that is something that comes up all the time with our homicide people, right? The homicide or, anything that seems somewhat accidental to when someone has caused the death, right? You want justice. a lot of people ask me, they're like, how do you sit here and talk about all this? How did you move on from this? Well, you don't really move on from it, but how have I been able to move forward from it? It was a lot of having a detective finally tell me that knew this person, knew the case, like, this is, I can relate to your previous colleagues, like the parents, because there is something in someone telling you you're not crazy, like, this really did happen, this is what happened, you were right. I think even to be told you were wrong and what the truth is, right? Just getting the honest feedback that you can as much as possible. That's how I was able to move forward. But I think the secondary question or secondary part of this is people are always like, but you didn't get justice. I will never get justice. It doesn't matter if that guy, and this took a lot of time to get there, but I had to realize, even if this guy went to jail, it doesn't bring my brother back. So I don't really believe in justice anymore. I had to really realize that and change my mindset, because there is no justice, right? The only thing that can positively happen is putting these particular people behind bars or wherever they need to be so that they don't do this again or don't harm other people. Right. I agree with that, but do I believe in justice? No, because you can't bring somebody back from the dead. And so I think that has helped some people to kind of learn that line of thinking and understand that. And I think it does kind of alleviate this pressure of going to court and having to get, like, I look at that as a bonus that could happen because you're protecting other people in the future. But it should not be contingent on you healing and moving forward, because it's not going to bring the person back. That was a huge thing for me.
Yeah, I think that's important for people to understand too, is like, no matter what time they either serve, don't serve, whatever the case may be, justice, quote unquote, is never really served, because the person's never going to come back. You're never going to see them again. You're never going to be able to talk to them again, anything like that. But knowing that person is behind bars, or serving a certain amount of time is allowing them not to do this to another family. And that's, I think, is what is like reassuring for people. So when that doesn't happen, that's very hard.
Yeah, I think that is when I've watched a lot of people, I've interviewed a lot of people that have gone through this, and I think that is the part that is helpful. I know there's some people that really want to face the person and say some words to them, and I get asked that question a lot too. Like, people are like, what would you say? And I'm like, pretty sure they've heard me at this point. I'm not exactly a quiet voice on this, right? I mean, like, pretty well known in this area now, specifically siblings, right? I mean, it's a very niche area, but I'm pretty sure they know. I'm pretty sure they've heard me. But another part of this is forgiveness, which usually people look at me like I'm totally nuts when I talk about this. They're like, what are you talking about? But on the journey, I had to learn, and I still deal with this, like, on a weekly, sometimes daily basis, depending on the time of the year, right, and what we're dealing with. But I had to relearn forgiveness and understand that forgiveness doesn't look the same for everything that happens. And people think I'm nuts when I first meet. They're like, you forgive the person that did this to your brother? And I'm like, I forgive them not in the traditional way. So not in the way that, like, let's say your partner, like, does something, right? Spends all your money, cheats on you, something like that. Like, you've got to decide, do you want to forgive them and heal together? Or is it unforgivable for you and you've got to separate, right? Like, that's a different type of forgiveness because you love that person and they betrayed you. Right. I had to realize that this is a different type of forgiveness. It's forgiving for yourself, which I think all forgiveness has an element of that, like, right, with the partner example, like, you still have to forgive for yourself, but you have to decide. You love this person. It's very different. I didn't know this person at all.
Right.
They did something completely unforgivable, but through time I started to realize, like, I've got to forgive for me. Because the only person this hurts at the end of the day is me. If I'm angry every day, or if I'm mad every day, and I'm like, this is ruling my life. And so I often get asked, like, how the hell did you do that? How did you do that?
Yeah.
And I think that the big thing to remember is that, time doesn't heal wounds, but time does help you heal. That's what I often say.
Yeah.
And I started to get kind of the tools to be able to heal, in the sense that I realized through time, I was like, this person has to live with the fact that they killed my brother every day of their lives. Doesn't make it okay, but I don't have to live with that. Like, I don't. And there were just different things along the way that helped me get to that place. You know, it doesn't mean that I still don't think, like, oh my God, this person is such a, you know, is disgusting to me, different things like that, right? But at the end of the day, I don't live with anger on a daily basis anymore. And that to me was also like a big milestone and a big relief, because I think, and I do a lot of talks on releasing like anger and grief, because for me, I always say that was like my drug of choice. I really hung out in anger, and I thought it was serving me, but it really wasn't.
Yeah. I can relate to you on that too, because I held on to, I have a friend who has been in and out of my life for about 17 years now. I feel like we've been friends. And he's been in and out of jail and just not made the right choices in life for different things, different reasons. And it got to a point where I was like, I just can't speak to you anymore. I can't do this. I went no contact for 3 years. Drugs have been a choice of his. I've never done drugs. It's just never been my thing. And I had a girl on the podcast, and she talked to me. She was an addict and in recovery. She was 6 years clean at that point. And the way that she explained recovery and addiction and all of that to me really changed my whole perspective on drugs in general. And so it really changed my perspective on our relationship, friendship. And he's still in prison at this point right now. And I hadn't spoke to him in 3 years. And I was like, I have to forgive him, not for him, for me. Because I'm holding on to so much hate and so much anger and so much resentment. And it's not healthy for me at all. And
there you
I
go.
sent him and I sent him $5 because I knew where he was. And I knew if I sent him money, he'd be like, what the hell? And he would eventually call me and be like, why did you send me money? I knew that was the only way to get in contact with him. And he did. About 2 weeks later, he called and he was like, why did you send me money? And I was like, I want you to listen to what I have to say. And I spent almost the whole 15-minute phone call just like letting him have it, you know? And I was like, this is it. If you want to be back in my life, this is going to be on my terms. And it's been really nice to rebuild our friendship based off of that. But I didn't forgive him for him. I did it for me. And it was so, like, the weight that was lifted off of my shoulders when I did that was incredible. And I was like, okay. And that was a part of my healing journey that I have really learned a lot while just doing my podcast, because I hear other people's stories and what they've been through and how they've healed and they've come out of these horrible things. And it's really changed my perspective on a lot of things, and it's healed me in ways I never expected. And it's insane. It blows my mind. But yeah, I know exactly what you mean by that.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely do. And I think, you know, that you have another great example of how it's important that we do it for ourselves. And when people are really deep in the loss, you know, and I get this question all the time too, does it count if I don't talk to my sibling anymore? Is that a loss? It's not one that we cover on the show traditionally, right? It's not something we talk about. But look, loss is loss. Like, you felt like you lost your friend. You had to separate. I'm sure he felt like he lost you. So the difference is you have the opportunity to have connection again, right? Like, when someone dies, you don't have that opportunity. So you have to resolve everything on your own, which can be quite challenging for a lot of people, right? I mean, it's all challenging, don't get me wrong. But when someone is dead and is no longer here, whatever you believe in, whether you believe in the afterlife or not, because you have to resolve it all yourself. Like, ask for help. I always say, like, ask for help, like, be a part of a community, go to therapy, whatever you need to do. But you're going to have to resolve that at the end of the day yourself. There's no responsibility on the other person. So I think there's also that awakening to it as well, and realizing like, I have to forgive. This happens a lot too with a lot of bereaved siblings and anyone who's lost anyone, right? Is, I wish I would have said this, or we were fighting at the time, or this and that. And I always tell people, I'm like, look, I don't know what happens when we die. I have my beliefs. I'm sure you have your beliefs, but I can bet you our loved one on the other side is probably not worried about, the fight that we had over who should have mom's house when we die or something. You know what I mean? I'm pretty sure they're doing something much cooler than that, or maybe nothing at all. But I'm not too worried about it.
Right.
Sorry about the page. Not too worried about it because, right? But that comes with time, right? People will also tell me too, they'll say, I don't know, I could never forgive, or I could never not be angry. I would have told you the same thing. 1 to 2 years in, would have told you exactly the same. So I think, again, I've really grabbed onto this saying over the past year, look, time does not heal all wounds, but time does help you heal. And it just gives you tools that you didn't have before. Yeah. And I love that you're doing that with your show here too. I think it's cool.
I don't think you ever completely recover from losing someone unexpectedly. I think time just makes it somewhat easier. Somehow the time makes it easier. You don't ever completely recover from something like that.
No.
You never will. I feel like you always still expect them to walk through the door. So you still expect that phone call or that text message or, whatever it may be. But you're never going to fully recover from that, no matter how much work you do.
Yeah. I don't think so either. And I think that can be really scary for people too, right? And during the loss, because they're like, I'm never going to recover from this. I think it's more about just having the mindset that you're just changed. You're changed. So it's about getting in touch with who you are now. It doesn't mean that you're a completely new person, but you're changed. Right. Like, think about major things in your life that have changed you, right? Like different milestones in your life. Why would this be any different? This person is physically, mentally, emotionally not in your life anymore. So of course it's going to change you. I think that was super helpful for me too, Paige. It was understanding that, because at first it was very scary. I'm like, I don't want to change. Like, I love who I am. But now 7 years into this, I look at who I've become, and I have a lot more self-love. I love myself a lot more. I have a lot more empathy for others. I have a lot more patience. Even though patience is not my virtue, I have more of it. But, and also I realize I'm just a much more vulnerable person in general. So had this not happened to me, I don't know, maybe those would have come from a different place or from a different life change. Of course, people are, always like, oh my God, so you're happy this happened? No, of course I would get my brother back, but if I could. But that's not what happened. That's not what happened. So what are you going to do with this, right? And I always tell people, I'm like, you have to make a choice. Like, do you want to do something where you can positively impact the world with your tragedy? And it doesn't have to be the day after it happens. It can be years later. Right. It can be a month later. It can be whenever. But what are you going to do with it? Because for me, my brother was 27. I was 30 when this happened. And 30 is a really pivotal age just in general, as we all know. And I thought I just had it all. I thought I had it all figured out at 30. And my life completely turned upside down. So,
yeah,
here we are.
Yeah. So you talked about on our last episode with Lenny and Paula about how you felt like you had a little bit more trauma to deal with than the rest of your family, because you actually were there when he came in the hospital and things like that. Talk to us a little bit about that and how that was.
Yeah, so I think, like we talked about with Lenny and Paula, and I didn't really see it that way at first. I just knew it was traumatic for my whole family, right? I really did. And so the day my brother was shot, I'll kind of give context. The day my brother was shot, I was the only one living in Atlanta like him. And so I got to the hospital when he was being wheeled in. I saw it all. I saw everything. He was, I'll share a little bit, but he was basically, I was running back to, if you guys are familiar with Atlanta, you know Grady Hospital. If you go there, it's not always a great thing, especially if you're going to trauma. It's not a good sign. So I was running all the way back, and they kept letting me go back because obviously, like, I'm his sister. And so I get back to the trauma area, and I'm like saying who my brother is, and they know what's going on. I could tell. It was like really weird. And I tell this much better, I think, on the show, but I'm trying to give you as much insight as I can on this one. But basically, he ends up getting wheeled around the corner, and they're trying to push me away, and I'm like, absolutely not. And I like ripped the curtain because they tried to hide him behind the curtain, and I saw him covered in blood, and his body was like rejecting basically life support, like what they were trying to keep him alive. They were trying to see if they could operate. It was very intense. And I will never forget pulling back that curtain because they were trying to pull me back, trying to not let me see it. But I remember pulling back the curtain. That was the first 100% view because I was in shock when he came around the corner. Like your brain almost can't recognize that that's your brother, your loved one, whatever, right? And so when the curtain got pulled back, it was him, and I saw him, and I will never forget this image for the rest of my life. It was like out of a scene in ER or something. It was insane, or Grey's Anatomy, what have you, whatever you're into. Yeah. But I was in shock. I mean, there was blood everywhere on the floors. It was extremely traumatic. And I remember the surgeon coming in at one point, and she said, you know, we can't operate. Like, all these things were happening so fast, like, because of where the bullet is, we can't operate. Like, all these people were coming in and talking to me, and it was a lot. Your brain, I don't think, I'm no psychologist, but I don't think your brain is prepared to process that kind of information as rapidly as I was seeing, hearing, making decisions. It was very intense. And so his girlfriend and her family ended up coming, but by the time they got there, it wasn't a great scene for them to arrive at either, but he was stabilized at that point and basically, I would say, in a coma. Like, he was gone. Like, we could have called it at that point. But they had him on life support at that point. So she still saw a pretty graphic situation, but it was not the scene that I had seen, and I'm so grateful to this day that it was only her and I that were ever in that room, because he was moved upstairs, and by the time my two sisters arrived, we were upstairs, which I'm sure was hard for them. Like, I never want to take away their experience. I'm sure it was extremely hard for them to walk in and see their brother basically in a coma on life support. Like, I mean, he was brain dead. So, I mean, beyond coma at this point, he's brain dead, keeping him on life support. So my mom and my dad could come and see him. And my dad lives in Africa. So it was just like, I'm like, you got to resuscitate him. You got to keep him whatever vegetated state we have, because his dad needs to say goodbye to him. Like, it was intense. And so all this happens very, very fast. And I don't think I really realized, because I didn't sleep the entire time in the hospital. I just laid on him for days, and I just wouldn't leave him. And I think I didn't realize how traumatizing that potentially was for me until I got back into therapy and started talking through it. And my therapist, along with some other people, really sat me down and were like, look, I'm like, no, I don't want to compare it. It's traumatic for everybody. No, I don't want to compare it. And I'm like, in reflection, I realized, and also talking it over deeply with my dad and some of my other friends and family, that was pretty scarring, to watch that, and it would have scarred anybody. But I think it took me a lot of time to realize that I had extreme trauma, and I ended up having, obviously, post-traumatic stress, and then I ended up having a lot of just mental and emotional issues from it that I internalized a lot. So it took time to really work that out. And I think the message that I kind of tell people in that is if we just keep because I was on this mission, right, to get justice for my brother, which we already kind of touched on. And I let my anger and my trauma kind of rule that fuel that fire. And I didn't really take a moment to stop and think like, oh my God, like maybe I need to take care of myself and think about what I've been through. I didn't think about that till years later, honestly, even though I was doing the therapy and I was hearing it. I wasn't actually hearing it. I wasn't listening. And then, now I'm very much like on the other side of it in some ways, but telling my father about it too, and like painting more of a picture for people, they have more of an understanding now of like what I went through and how traumatic it was, because it was. But I am grateful that my sisters didn't see that. I'm grateful that my parents didn't see that. But I think I was also very frustrated for a long time because I didn't feel like anybody understood why this was so traumatic for me. I think they do now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't even imagine something like that. I mean, I don't even know what to say after that. Like the traumatic experience has to be just unbearable for something like that. I can't even imagine going through something like that. So I give you a lot of compassion for that, because I mean, I'm almost in tears just thinking about it. Like
it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, Paige. Yeah, I think you know, and people say that to me, and I say that to people who have experiences that I haven't had. But I think the message is too, we go through things that we're not prepared to go through, and it's okay to take, I wish I would have done this, take a minute and say, this is not a normal thing. This is not an everyday thing.
Right.
This is difficult. It's okay to take some time to work through it. Yeah. And I wish I would have done that.
Right. And you always see those things where it's like, it says God gives its hardest, battles to its toughest warriors, or however that saying goes. And it's like, sometimes I'm tired of being a warrior. It's like, I'm tired of fighting. I'm over it. Can I pass my shield on? Like,
Yeah.
But I think it's true, because, you sometimes, the other people in our family just probably couldn't have handled it at all, so. But
you bring up a really good point, Paige, because I don't publicly talk a lot about my sisters out of respect for them, but I will say this. I don't think either one of them, I wouldn't have wanted either one of them to handle it. I wouldn't have wanted them. I mean, there's also a thing, I think sometimes when you're the oldest, you're okay assuming a lot of the responsibility, because I'm the oldest.
Right.
So I just think there's some things with that. But also, my brother and I were really, really close. I mean, we have the same birthday, 3 years apart. It's very weird. We had not spoken in a long time, but I didn't feel like I was in a super negative place with him. This was extremely devastating for me. I always dreamed of the day that he would be doing much better, because he struggled with drugs and alcohol, which I think I've shared before. And I talk about a lot, and I talk about very openly. I thought if I got a call about my brother, it was going to be that. I never thought it was going to be something like this. But you just never know what's going to happen in life. But yeah, I think that's a really strong point, is that, yes, why does God give us some of these things? I totally believe in that. I love the quote from Mother Teresa where she's like, I know God gives me so much stuff, or whatever, won't give you more that you can handle, or something like that. And then she says, I wish God didn't trust me so much. Okay, I'm no Mother Teresa, but I do love that quote.
Still,
because I'm like, when I heard that one, it hits, right? I was like, yes, girl, I totally feel you on that, Mother Teresa. Totally get that one. But I think, one of my sisters is only a year younger than me, and, her relationship with my brother is her own thing that she needed to work out, and I hope she has. I'm not sure. But my sister, who's 10 years younger than me, she was only 20 years old. She wasn't even old enough to have a drink. She wasn't even, you know what I mean? Like, this is, it's taken her some years to come down the processing pike. And I think I shared this on your other episode, that, she hit the milestone age that we talked about on the other episode. And that's been her journey. And so, I try to respect their private journeys and what they're going on, because it's not mine to speak on. But I am grateful, because I don't know. I can't imagine what that would have done for them based on where both of them were in their lives. So Yeah, I mean, I was supposed to be the one that was there that day. As hard as it has been, I'm okay now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's I think the different experiences is definitely important to talk about too. I know I talked a little bit about it on the episode that we did about my aunt that passed away tragically. She slipped and fell in the shower, and it was just like,
I know.
wait, what? Like,
Yep.
you don't even think you're simply taking a shower. Like, you don't even think something like that's going to happen. Um, and it's crazy because my cousin, her daughter that lived with her at the time, had just left 2 days before that. And I think she blamed herself for a long time that she wasn't home. But once we found out that, like, she hit her head, like, right back here, so, like, right at the base of her skull. So it was like the second that she hit, there was nothing you could have done anyway. So, like, once we
Right.
found that out, it was, like, such a relief to know that even if she had been there, like, nothing could have like, she couldn't have helped in any way, shape, or form anyway. Um, but for we all handled it very differently. Again, she was the baby. My mom's the oldest. My mom completely lost it. Like, it was really bad for a long time. My son didn't even want to take a shower for like a week. I was like, you gotta take a shower. You're gonna be okay. So like he was terrified to even get in the shower. I had to buy one of those like mats that you put in there for him to even want to get in because he was like, what if I slip and fall and die? And I was like, it's gonna be like you're gonna be fine.
Yeah.
So it freaked him out in a weird way and that sort of thing. And he's actually fallen in the shower a couple of times since then. And the first time it ever happened, he just like panicked, lost it, started screaming, crying. Of course, I run back there. I'm freaking out. I'm like, like I'm holding him as he's like soaking wet. My whole body's soaking wet because I pick him up out of the shower because he's just sitting at the bottom, like freaking out. So like it all affected us this like totally different ways. So it's like, it's just crazy how death can affect everybody in a completely different way. Like he was so freaked out by that. And of course it freaked me out because I hear him fall and I hear the shampoo bottles like falling and I'm like, oh my God, And it was probably like 2 weeks
Yeah.
after it happened. So he was completely panicked. And it was after that I went and bought the floor mat to put in the bathtub because he was like, I'm not taking another shower. And I was like, I'll go get a sticky mat and it'll be fine. Then you can't fall. So it was like,
Yeah.
and it was crazy. You just never think about
Bless
that. Like
his heart. Oh my
you get in the
gosh.
shower
Yeah.
and you're just like, you never expect that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's the
But
wildest
I'm sure that was
things.
so healing for. It was her daughter that was there, right? That day. That's who was there. It was your cousin? Is that who was there?
She had just left. She was home alone. She was there by herself.
But I'm sure that was so healing for her to realize, like, had she even been there and she
It
slipped
wouldn't
and
have.
fell, there's nothing she could have done. Like, there are those little things
Yeah.
in these major losses that I don't know if I want to call it a gift, but these little kind of pieces of relief that we get where I can relate somewhat to that because I felt very relieved in some ways after talking to the detective that actually ended up helping me, even though it was past the statute of limitations. But I felt relief in knowing that I had done everything that I could because I felt so powerless to try to find justice for my brother and things like that. So I felt like I had failed him in so many ways, and I know now that I didn't. I did everything that I could. I was, when your sibling passes and they're not married, if your parents are alive, they're the ones who have all the power. It's not you. So because my father lives on another, not a country, continent, and my mom
Yeah.
didn't want anything to do with it, I was able to get essentially, it's not quite power of attorney, but enough power from a friend of mine who was an attorney. She was able to help me get medical records and all the things I needed to do to figure out as much as I could with the case and kind of be the point of contact.
Yeah.
But it was really hard. That's one of the things they don't tell you about this kind of stuff. If you are not the spouse and you're not the parents, like the only way that would have legally fallen to me without me putting up a fight and paying to get these things done was if both of my parents had been deceased and he wasn't married. Well, he wasn't married because he was young, right? So that's not uncommon to be unmarried at 27. His girlfriend was barely 21. So but my parents were still alive. So they're
Yeah.
next of kin. They don't recognize siblings unless your parents are dead. Then I would have been. But technically I was for something. So I felt so much pressure to do everything that I possibly could for this. The pressure, the weight of the world that was on me. And again, this is not anything against my sisters, but I don't think they'll ever understand the responsibility that I felt to get justice for him, to fight for him, to tell his story, to do. And I have a sense of relief over the past couple of years because, one, doing the show has been an amazing way to honor my brother, and that's why I started it. That's why I did it. That's why I told the story, because I wanted the truth to be out there. It was really a love letter to honor him. That's really what it was. And now it's turned into a lot of love letters for other people too. But I think you're right. I think people grieve in different ways. For me, it was a tremendous amount of responsibility that I felt. And I don't know that everyone in my family understands that, but I'm okay with them not understanding that now. That's what's changed through time.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a lot for my cousin. You know, she had actually driven all the way to Colorado, and we're in Kentucky. So she was, I mean, almost on the other side of the country when this happened, you know, and it was in February. It was during an ice storm that we had. So, like, you know, we hadn't heard from her in a couple days, and we knew that, like, my cousin had left, and it was like nobody had heard from her, but that's kind of normal for her. So we weren't like freaking out, you know, and we knew that this bad storm had come through, and she lives out in the country. So it was like, maybe we should send somebody to check on her just to make sure. So that's what it was. Like, the neighbor that lives next door, well, she lived out in the country. So it was, you know, like next door, but like half a mile down the road next door kind of thing, you know? And so he was one to kind of always check on her and check on the house and things if she wasn't home or whatever. And he went over, and he could see the dogs were in the house, and there was like dog feces and stuff on the living room floor. And I was like, something's not right. Like, I knew in that moment that something, because her dogs are like her children, you know? And I was like, something's not right. But her cars were home. So I was like, my dad was like, I'm going to go out there. And as soon as my mom told me that, I was like, it's not good. I just instantly knew. I was like, And about a half hour later, my mom called me back and just was, you just couldn't hear what she was saying. And I knew at that point what it was. And they had gone in, and the shower was actually still running, because I guess the drain wasn't covered or whatever. So the water was, you know, going out of the drain. So it had been running for like 2 days almost. And she was just laying there. Yeah. So it's just one of those, like, you know, like those Final Destination freak accident kind of things. That's instantly like what I thought of. I was like, holy shit, like, what, you know? And it was just like, what? You know, you just never expect something like that to happen. So, I mean, it's just unbelievable when something like that happens. And I mean, my mom's first thing was like, did somebody break in? Yeah, like my mom was like, did somebody break in? Did something like that happen? And my dad was like, I don't think so. I think it was just a slip and fall.
Yeah, then you start asking all these questions, right? Like, well, could this have happened, or could that have happened? And you try to make sense of it all. And that's hard too, right? And trying to, you know, what everybody talks about, trying to find closure and trying to find, like, that doesn't really exist. I tell people that all the time. Like, it doesn't really exist. You have to find out what you need personally. You need to find out the answers that you need to be able to move forward, which a lot of people will tell. They're like, well, what's the difference? What's the difference between moving on and moving forward? And I will often tell people, because they're like, this is just semantics. And I'm like, I don't think it is. Because I think when people tell us, you need to move on, it's extremely disrespectful. And it also implies that something's wrong with us for grieving and feeling pain and experiencing things, right? And well, there might be something wrong with us, like maybe we're not grieving in a healthy way, like maybe we're using alcohol or drugs to numb, or we're avoiding, like, that's okay. But the verbiage around it needs to be different, and we need to change that, because telling somebody to move on, like, you're not coming from a place of empathy, you're coming from a place of judgment. That's why I think telling people to move on is different. And also, I think we think about moving on as, like, when you leave a house, when you sell a home, or when you break up with a significant other, right, that you're in a relationship with, like that, you're going to move on from that eventually. Hopefully, right? You got to let that go. Like when you leave a job or something, right? You move on from it. You move on to the next thing. But asking somebody to move on from a loved one or a family member, they're always going to be in your heart. So that's not really appropriate. That's like you're leaving them behind. So moving forward is different because it means that you can still carry them with you. But how are you going to do it in a healthy way? And how are you going to make sure that you can heal as much as you can? But you're also allowed to still mourn them because it's, I mean, we talk about this all the time, right? Grief is really just love. That's all it is. Like when you grieve intensely, it's because you loved that person a lot. It's people overcomplicate it. It's not that complicated. Grief is complicated, but it's not that complicated as to why we're grieving. It's because you loved so much. That's it.
Yeah.
So that's the difference between the two. And that's why what people need to understand is, you know, telling people to move on is not going to help them. Trying to understand why they're unable to move forward and just take that memory with them and take the memory of that person with them forward. That's a real question. That's a good question to ask and try to help and understand and connect with someone on that level, because if they're having trouble moving forward, I see it all the time. And I connect with a lot of people that are having trouble moving forward. And it can be, it happened a month ago. It can be, it happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. And it means there's some unresolved stuff that you got to work on. And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing that I always like to say too. Like, I don't think anybody's ever truly like healed from anything. We're always in a state of healing. Always.
I agree. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, like I'm a domestic abuse survivor. I'm never going to be healed from that shit. I'm always going to have triggers. I'm always going to have things that come up and things that, you know, take me right back to a moment in time where things happen. I'm never going to be healed. I'm always going to be healing from it, you know? So I feel like, you know, while it's different, it's the same.
Look, trauma is trauma, right? And so, yeah, you've definitely been through a significant trauma. And I am not a therapist. I'm just around all of this all the time. And I will tell you that I've had other traumas in my life as well. And I can relate to you. And people are like, well, that means you're not healed or you're not fixed. And I'm like, I'm not broken. So constantly healing just means that you're aware of the experience. You're aware of what happened to you. And you don't want it to happen again. But if you do find yourself in a situation like that again, you have whatever the situation is, right? As someone who's been through trauma, you and I both, and probably almost everyone that listens to the show, because we don't get through life without a scratch or two on us, right? So it's just how it is.
Right.
But thinking about it as you're actively healing at all times, and you may be in different places at different times, I think is so much healthier. And I agree with you. It should be an action thing that we're constantly doing. And that means sometimes you work on it more than others. Sometimes you're like, I'm actually okay right now. Like, it's all good. I can talk about this. And sometimes you might be like, I don't really want to talk about that experience, or I don't really want to dive into that. And that's okay too. And I think that's, you know, I think you brought up a great point, because I think it can be really overwhelming for people, because they're like, I just need to go through like the stages of healing, or I need to go through the, you know, the grief stages, right? That's a whole, and we talked about that on the other episode, but there's this pressure for closure. Right. There's this pressure to get to this. It's like in life in general, it's a pressure to become this successful monetarily. It's pressure to, like, we forget to just take a look around and go, this is a journey, actually. There's peaks and valleys, and it's okay. It's okay. Like, cause it's a process, and once we realize, like, the secret is, there's really no final destination except for we all die. The final destination is only that. So there's going to be different times in our lives where we feel different things and we experience different things. And I think that just makes it so much more palatable for people, and takes the, like we were talking about earlier, takes the pressure off of, I've got to heal. I've got to make this. I've got to get here. Who says?
Yeah.
I know some people that are fine a week after losing someone, and I know people that are 50 years later, they're still grieving that person. But it's about what they do with that healing process.
Yeah, that's one reason, like, when I watch a lot of, again, back to like true crime, when I watch a lot of true crime stuff and they're like, well, this person isn't handling it like they should be. And I'm like, well, how were they supposed to handle it? Like, everybody handles situations completely different. Like, you can't say just because this person isn't like broke down, crying, screaming on the floor means that they did it. it
I agree.
that's not a fair analogy. You don't have any idea how you would handle it, because just like with my aunt, when my mom called and told me that she was gone, I just kind of sat there. Like, I was almost like, even though I knew in my mind before she called me that that's probably what she was going to call and tell me, I was still in a state of like, wait, what? Like, I didn't instantly like break down and start crying and screaming and like freaking out. But now when my Nana passed away and I knew that that was coming, lost it, like I broke down and screaming, I'm
Mm-hmm.
crying, I'm like freaking out. And I knew that was coming because she had a stroke and had been in the hospital for 4 days. Like, it was a matter of minute to minute waiting. Like, when is she going to pass away? And I had a
Mm-hmm.
completely almost the opposite reaction to the situation. So it's like, you never know how somebody's going to react in any situation. So to say
Yeah.
that like this person just lost their wife and they're not reacting the way they're supposed to means that he probably killed her. Like, that's not a fair analogy, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, and it's been, I mean, being a true crime junkie, it's been disproven so much, right? So they have to look more
Mm-hmm.
at factual behavioral stuff versus this
Right.
emotional thing, because when people have looked too much at the emotional aspect of it, like, you're right, some people with shock, like some people, like, when this all was happening with my brother, like
Mm-hmm.
when I got the call I mean, I was not crying. I was not breaking down. I was in like take care of business mode. Like, I had to be
Mm-hmm.
strong. I had to take care of, I mean, I was seeing things that I didn't realize were going to impact me probably for the rest of my life. But I was like, okay, like, we got to keep him on life support. We got to get mom here. We got to get dad here. We got to get my sisters here. Like, regardless of where my relationship stands with each person, like, they deserve to say goodbye to my brother. Like, I'm going to try to keep him, like, he wasn't talking, he wasn't audible. Like, I mean, he was brain dead essentially, but they want to say goodbye to his physical body, right? Like, I was just in that
Mm-hmm.
mode. And like, I think there's some indications that I would be that way because I've always been very like, okay, like, let's take care of business. Like, because I
Mm-hmm.
come from quite a dysfunctional background with my family. So I kind of always had to be like, okay, how are we going to solve this? So I think it was just kind of magnified, but I didn't know until that happened that that's what I would do and what I
Mm-hmm.
would jump into. And then I didn't know that right afterwards I would go into this very angry state. Like, grief really magnified some of my
Mm-hmm.
characteristics, and it really opened me up to some new ways of living life. But like, I wouldn't have known any of that, to your point, Paige, prior to this experience. And I think one more thing I
Yeah.
want to add too about what you're saying is I was very judgmental too in the first, I would say, I mean, immediately, but even in the first couple months to years, about how everyone else in my family was grieving. And it's something that has changed significantly, um, for me, because I no longer am judgmental. As long as you're grieving in a healthy way, I don't judge it. If even if you're not grieving in a healthy way, it's not about judgment. It's more about like, okay, hang on, how do we do this in a healthy way, right? I feel
Yeah.
totally different nowadays about it. And
Mm-hmm.
I just felt like if everybody wasn't like me, if everybody wasn't on a mission to get justice, I felt like if people weren't calling the detective on the case every week, I felt like if people weren't speaking out, doing, like, I felt like they weren't grieving. And I
Yeah.
know that I was wrong. I know that I was wrong. Um, do I love some of the ways that they grieved? No. Do I think all of the ways that they grieved are healthy? No. But not every way I was grieving was healthy either. So I have
Right.
become a lot less judgmental just as a person through this experience. And I mean, I'm a Virgo. We judge. Okay. Like, that's what we do. We analyze, we judge. Like, come on, that's who we are. So,
Mm-hmm.
but it's changed me. I mean, it's really changed me in that way. And I don't have any anger at all towards any of my family members. I worry for some of them sometimes, on their journey, because I think there's a lot to unpack, and I feel that way about a lot of people when I meet them and they're telling me where they are with their grief journey. But that's not the same thing as judgment. Having deep concern and empathy is totally different. So although this experience is horrific and some days it feels like I'm living in an alternate universe, like I can't believe this is real, there's also a part of it where I think it's important that you do find gifts in it. And the gifts that I've received through this are an amazing community of people that I have friends with people that I've never even met. I have friendships with them. They understand my journey. I understand theirs. It's just a deeper, my friendship circle doesn't even look the same as it did 7 years ago.
Same.
And that's to be expected when you do growth, right? And you go through changes. And I think that can be scary for some people, but when you go through a traumatic experience or you go through traumatic change or loss or fill in the blank, you do get a gift of knowing who is really there for the right reasons and who is real. And sometimes it's surprising. Sometimes it's the person you talk to or see maybe 2 times a year. They step up to the plate. And sometimes your person that you're going out with every week and getting drinks with, and that's your bestie. Sometimes it ain't them, ladies and gentlemen. It's not. So it can be really, right? You relate to this page, right? So it can be very disarming to realize that, because you can feel there are these secondary losses in your loss, because you're like, wait a second, this is supposed to be my best girlfriend. This is supposed to be like my brother. And not everybody, this won't be everybody in your life, but I will say a good chunk of people in my life were not who they were. And I feel like my friendships now are just so much deeper. They're just deeper. So it's something I like to bring up too, because clearly you can relate to it as well, Paige, and I'm sure a lot of you listening can as well.
Yeah, it was really surprising to realize when I started. I really want to say when I started, probably about 8 months before I started my podcast, I fell into this very deep, dark depression. Probably the worst one I've ever been in my entire life. I ended a relationship, and it wasn't that the relationship was bad. The relationship was with someone who just didn't have motivation, didn't want to do anything for themselves. He treated me very well. He treated my kids great. It was just I wanted more for him than he wanted for himself. And I just got to a point where I was like, I can't do this anymore. So I ended it. I chose to end it. He left. And when he left, I was like, I fell into this deep, dark depression. And I was just like, I wanted this to end. Like, what is happening? Like, why am I in this place? And, therapy took a long time to figure it out. But I think it was because when my abusive relationship ended, I went into survival mode. And I never really mourned that relationship, because I was in, they say that fight or flight. And I was in fight/survival mode for years. And I never realized that. Well, when this relationship ended, I was financially set. I had a good job. I was able to take care of me and my kids by myself. Like, I didn't need help. So I was able to really grieve and mourn both of those relationships at the same time. And it was detrimental.
Yeah, you got double duty. Isn't that fun? Yep.
It was horrible. I went to work Monday through Friday, but when I hit that front door, frozen pizza and chicken nuggets became my kids' meals for months. But they were fed. That's what mattered. Fast food became our nightly dinners, because it was stop and get it on the way home. They ate, I came and laid in bed, and that was it. And on the weekends, I didn't leave my bedroom for 8 months. And then I finally started this podcast, and it has turned me into someone I never expected to be in the best way possible. And it's just hearing other people's stories and like the empathy and the sympathy and the gratification that I have grown and gained, not just for myself, but for other people in general, is something I never expected. And the community that I have built and the people that I still talk to that I have had on my podcast is amazing. And I absolutely fucking love it. Like, I never expected it at all. And just connecting with people that are like-minded has been really cool. And, like you said, I've lost some of the people that I expected to have in my life forever, and it's been so hard. But I've gained some friends that I know I don't have to question, and that's really nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing with me and obviously everyone that listens, just your vulnerability. And I think that's the thing too, right? Is on my journey as well, Paige, as I've realized that prior to my brother's murder, death, I thought being vulnerable was a weakness. I really did. I always tried to have like this big wall up.
Yeah.
I didn't want to let people in. This was life changing in the sense that now I just tell it all. I tell it all.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that not everybody in my life wants their stuff out there, so I am respectful of that. But as far as it comes to me,
Mm-hmm.
there's really not a whole lot that I won't share at this point
Yep.
in my life.
Same.
Because
Yeah.
it's taught me to be vulnerable because because I've realized that being vulnerable is being strong. That's what's really being strong. Pretending, I don't even know that I
Mm-hmm.
was pretending, but I mean, putting up a wall and really guarding myself, I thought that was strength. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, don't let people in. Just let people think you're super corporate, super this, super that. Now I've realized very early into the 7 years, I realized that being vulnerable was a superpower. It really is. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel, ironically enough, I feel more comfortable being vulnerable and just being like, this is the
Yeah.
truth. This is how it is. Like, because I've
Yeah.
always wanted to just speak out and be honest. And I thought people would, judge me or this and that. And they're going to judge you either way. So you might as well be
Right.
vulnerable and
Yeah.
open.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I just find it so much more refreshing. Yeah. And I feel just so much more true to myself. And I've always been a truth seeker and a truth sayer, as I say. So it was always hard for me to kind of feel like I had to edit myself, and I don't edit myself at all anymore. Like it's all out
Mm-mm.
there.
No.
Yeah.
I always joke. I'm like, listen, my skeletons are out on the front lawn at Halloween and all year long because I have nothing to hide anymore. Like, I just don't.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is who I am. If you don't like it, then okay, bye. Like, I don't really care
Yeah.
anymore. I am who I am, and I've done what I've done, and I've been through what I've been through. It is what it is. Like, I literally have a shirt that says, "It is what it is. Fuck what it was." And like I've kind of just used that as like my life motto now, like, you
Yeah.
know. So
I relate. I really do. It's such
yeah.
a good feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Listen, I have loved having you on. I think that you're doing amazing things, even though it's come from a traumatic experience and a place of pain. I think people like you and I who have been through these traumatic, horrible experiences really take that and turn it into helping others and giving back. And it seems to be a
Yeah.
running thing that I've realized while doing this podcast is it seems like every person that I have on every episode has taken their trauma and their struggle and their hardships and they turn it into helping others, whether it's creating a podcast or, their own business or, like Paula is doing, a foundation. They turn it
Mm-hmm.
into helping others so that they don't have to feel alone in what they go through. And I think that just says everything about who we are as people. So I love that.
I think it's the theme of your show. I really do, Paige. I think we mentioned this when we first all kind of met you, that that's really
Mm-hmm.
the theme of your show is kind of, yes, creating yourself, of course, but also like how did you create yourself, right? And it's interesting that every single person that you have on has been through something traumatic, but also not shocking, right? And then they've kind of created themselves through this, and I definitely
Mm-hmm.
relate to it. So I've loved being here. Thank you for I love being on the other side
Yeah.
of the mic and sharing my story. I don't get to do it enough. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I
Yeah.
know. Yeah. Well, listen, tell everybody where they can find you, and I'll include it in the show notes as well.
Yeah, thanks, Paige. So, yes, if you or someone you know, right, has lost a sibling, or if you're just curious, super easy. We have a website with everything there. It's called thesurvivingsiblings.com. We're also on, of course, Instagram, Surviving Siblings Podcast, and TikTok, Surviving Siblings Podcast. I go live a lot. I do open sessions. We also have our monthly private group. We have workshops, summits, all of that good stuff. It's all on the website or join me on TikTok because I go live every week. So yeah, I'd love to connect with you.
Sounds good. Listen, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, Paige. This was awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all so much for tuning in to this week's episode. Make sure you hit the follow button on whatever listening platform you are using, and head over to my social media pages and give me a follow there as well. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and now TikTok at Creating Yourself Pod. And if you have a story you would like to share on this podcast, email me at creatingyourselfpod@gmail.com, or you can message me on any of my social media pages. Make sure and come back next Tuesday for a brand new episode. Hope you guys have a great week. Bye.